नमस्ते बियोन्ड द बाइनरीको पडकास्ट सिरिजमा यहाँहरू सबैलाई स्वागत छ। बियोन्ड द बाइनरी गेहेन्द्र धिमाल फाउन्डेसन र जर्मनीको सङ्घीय गणतान्त्रिक दूतावासको साझेदारीमा भइरहेको एउटा शैक्षिक अभियान हो, जसको उद्देश्य LGBTQIA+ मुद्दाहरूलाई सेन्सिटाइज र भोकलाइज गर्ने रहेको छ। यो पडकास्टमा पनि हामी यही मुद्दाहरूलाई टेकेर विभिन्न छलफलहरू गर्नेछौँ। मेरो नाम हो नुतन।
मेरो नाम चाहिँ सुमेधा।
र आज हामी हाम्रो गत वर्षको क्वेयर एम्बेसेडर वर्कसप र 7 प्रोभिन्स क्याम्पेन रिलेटेड लर्निङ र एक्सपिरियन्सहरूबारे कुराकानी गर्नेछौँ। सो वाइ डोन्ट वी स्टार्ट विथ तिमीले कसरी अप्लाई गर्यौ भनेर। हाउ डिड यु अप्लाई एन्ड बिकम अ क्वेयर एम्बेसेडर सुमी?
सो मैले अप्लाई गरेको भनेको चाहिँ सिन्स एभ्रिथिङ इज अनलाइन, आई स इट अन लाइक एन अथर्स इन्स्टाग्राम स्टोरी अनि लाइक आई हेभ नेभर सिन अ क्वेयर वर्कसप बिफोर, सो आई वाज इमिडिएटली इन्ट्रिग्ड। अप्लाई गरेँ अनि ठ्याक्क कलेजको पनि ब्रेक चलिरहेको थियो, पर्फेक्ट टाइमिङ होइन। अनि अप्लाई गरेँ, इन्टरभ्यू भयो अनि आई गट इन। त्यसपछि 5 डेजको वर्कसप एन्ड देन द 7 डेज प्रोभिन्स क्याम्पेन। द्याट वाज अ लट अफ फन। काठमाडौँबाट बाहिर धेरै ट्राभल गरेको थिइनँ, सो लाइक गुड एक्सपिरियन्स। म चाहिँ भैरवा मात्रै गएँ, बट आई नो अ फ्यु पिपल वेन्ट टु अ कपल अफ सिटिज।
म चाहिँ चितवन र धनगढी गएको थिएँ, जहाँ चाहिँ हामीले वर्कसपबाट द थिङ्स वी लर्न त्यो रिलेटेड फेसिलिटेसन गरेको थियो। सेम थिङ यु डिड। तिम्रो एक्सपिरियन्स कस्तो रह्यो? हाउ अबाउट वी स्टार्ट फ्रम योर मेजर लर्निङ अर टेक अवे फ्रम द वर्कसप एन्ड देन लाइक वी क्यान टक अबाउट 7 प्रोभिन्स क्याम्पेन।
So major takeaway from the workshop, for me at least, probably would be like, even you don't know as much as you think you do.
Yeah.
Like when I went in there like knowing a lot of stuff that I thought I knew a lot of stuff, but when I went in there like I learned way more. Just I wasn't expecting the variety, the diverse,
the discourses.
Yes, I know. So like I learned a lot of those, especially from the workshop. I also got to meet so many people, and they were all so lovely, and everyone had like a topic they were passionate about and they were willing to share. So like that was like the biggest takeaway from me. Like the community itself is like really good.
The shared love for the community was there, and it was a very welcoming space. That too, like मेरो लागि takeaway would be like getting to know the people. Of course, like learning part पनि थियो, तर yeah, the people we met and the friends we made. Yes. What about the campaign? तिम्रो what were you expecting वहाँनेरि गएर facilitate गर्नुभन्दा अगाडि, and how was your experience after the facilitation?
So facilitate गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ like गर्ने अगाडि चाहिँ I was like very nervous about it. Like
why nervous?
So like I used to read a lot of queer books, when I was younger.
Yes.
And that's how I found about found about
got
the community.
to know about the community.
Yes. So like त्यसरी नै थाहा पाएको. And when I was younger and I tried to share it with my friends, like a few of them were respecting, but I got a lot of pushback. I remember reading books in classes and my teachers being like, oh, you shouldn't read those. But like I've had experience like those, so for me it's a topic that not a lot of people like want to hear about, in my experience at least. So like when I was going there, I thought I would get a lot of pushback from students, like maybe from teachers as well, but that surprisingly didn't happen. When I went there and I talked to the students, of course there's a few students, but they're teenagers, they're young, a few rebellious ones always pop up. They were like very curious about it. I remember like a few students after like we finished the facilitation, they came up to me and being like, okay, so like I didn't understand this point, could you explain any further? Or like I got some of this but I'm still confused about this, could you please let me know? It was really nice.
I can totally relate to what you're saying. म facilitate गर्दाखेरि पनि students were very curious के one of the students हामी धनगढी जाँदाखेरि came up to us, not just one, like after the session पनि they would come up to us and ask यो भनेको के हो, अलि म confused भएँ भनेर. And then there was movie screening अनि त्यो पछि पनि feedback लिने बेलामा पनि आएर सोधिरहेको थियो क्या. अनि एकजना स्टुडेन्टले चाहिँ I am very interested in this, I want to volunteer what you're doing के हुन्छ नि उसले आएर इन्ट्रेस्ट देखाएको थियो, which was really nice. अनि the curiosity के अनि I can totally understand त्यो the fear you had about the holdback हुन्छ नि negatively लिन्छ कि स्कुलबाट या स्टुडेन्टहरूले if they would like poke fun or something भनेर, because people like us who are passionate about these issues, we've had experiences like this. Yeah.
What has your experience been like with the queer community, or like about queer subjects, like before you joined the workshop?
So adding on to why I was fearful भन्दाखेरि चाहिँ and my understanding of queer issues, it has not been that long of me knowing and understanding the issue itself. So म चाहिँ I was in grade 11. I have always known that there exists something beyond the box, यो दुईटा binary box, male, female, man, women, whatever you say, the societal construct, त्योदेखि बाहिर something exists भनेर, because त्यस्तो त्यो unknown पनि छैनौँ नि त हामी. Mediaमा we can see, and we can see within the community there are people who maybe they're dressing up अलि ambiguously androgynously, do not conform to either of the के अरे boxes. अनि so I was curious पहिलादेखि नै, अनि I think like most kids are curious about this. Maybe it's just my opinion because I have always been curious. तर अनि 11th grade मा चाहिँ I had friends who were a little problematic. So what I felt the need to do a bit of my research on the diversity of gender and sexuality. अनि मैले through internet, like I searched up things. I need to know exactly what this means and what that means so that I can teach these people what exactly it is भनेर. अनि I prepared a small presentation. अनि मेरो English teacher, he's very nice, and he was very encouraging of things you bring out of the syllabus जस्तो के. अनि I told him I did a little bit of research about LGBTQI plus issues, and I would like to present it in the class भनेर भने. अनि he was very nice, अनि हुन्छ भनेर भन्नुभयो. अनि मैले I gave the presentation, I हुन्छ नि taught them about, I started with the gender braid analogy के, because that is the easiest way to understand. So I gave the presentation about gender braid analogy. अनि मैले भन्दै गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ after the class, there was rumor that I was gay, I was lesbian. So त्यही भएर मैले त्यो presentation दिएको. It was like a coming out story for them. But it's funny to me now, and it's funny to me now that I share this. That 11th grade, it's not that long ago. Okay? It's only 4 years ago. तर म 11 क्लासमा हुँदाखेरि them calling me gay still was हुन्छ नि a form of insult के. They called me के अरे म lesbian हो भनेको चाहिँ was a form of something bad. Gay is bad भनेर.
So यसमा I've had like a somewhat similar experience. So when I was in like I used to read a lot of queer literature भनेर. So I love sharing it with people, so I wanted to show it to them and like this is so nice.
Yes.
So when I shared it with my friends, so the rumor started that okay, she's gay. Right? त्यो यति perpetuate भयो कि like मैले 8th क्लासमा पढेको थिएँ त्यो हैन. अनि I think that's when the rumors started flying. I remember 10th grade मा हुँदाखेरि हाम्रो short signing गर्छ नि, त्यो बेलामा this guy that like I've never met, by the way, हाम्रो 4वटा section हुन्थ्यो, म एउटा sectionको मान्छेसँग मात्रै कुरा गर्थेँ. अनि this guy, I've never met him, like I've seen him hallways ma हैन. He came up to me bold face and was like, म तिम्रो short मा lesbian joke लेख्छु ल भनेर.
Yeah.
And so I was very confused. I was like, yeah, go for it. But like I thought back to it, like when the whole signing thing was over, I was at home and I was like, that guy was making fun of me, man. So like these type of experience I feel like are so common when you try to bring up these issues.
त्यही सोचेर गएको थियौँ होला कि हामी त्यो भएर तर मेबी हामीलाई अलिकति सजिलो किन पनि भयो होला भने अहिले चाहिँ सिलेबसमा 7th ग्रेडको सिलेबसमा पनि दे हेभ लाइक अ लिटल बिट के अरे 7th ग्रेडको सिलेबसमा अलिकति इपिएचको सब्जेक्टमा आई थिङ्क अलिकति LGBTQIA+ के हो अनि भनेर राखिएको छ जस्तो लाग्छ मलाई अनि मेबी त्यो अलिकति ओरिएन्ट भएकोले उनीहरूको क्युरियोसिटी वाज देयर अनि द्याट इट हेल्प्ड us and them to understand and explore it further.
And यसमा पनि you said like you had a very encouraging teacher, right?
Yes.
That's also really helpful. जस्तै म भैरवमामा गएको बेला the teacher we collaborated with, they were so nice. They were so willing to learn themselves and impart that same knowledge onto their students. Like त्यस्तो supportive teacher मात्र भयो भने पनि like it makes a whole world of difference. Yeah.
Yes, for one student हुन्छ नि जसलाई चाहिँ एकदमै त्यो आइडेन्टिटीसँग कन्फ्लिक्ट भइरहेको छ उसको लागि जस्ट टु have that form of support is a lot.
So हामीले अहिलेसम्म we've talked about the QA को workshop को कुरा गऱ्यौँ हैन तर हामी जेन्डर ब्रेड म्यान जेन्डर आइडेन्टिटीको कुरा त निकालेर छौँ हैन but I don't think it's very like clear to everyone हामीले के को कुरा गरेर भनेर should we just like explain के हो जेन्डर ब्रेड पर्सन भनेको
so gender is a social construct अनि but the easiest way to understand diversity in gender and sexuality is through the gender braid analogy. हामीलाई के सिकाइएको छ हाम्रो अन्डरस्ट्यान्डिङ के छ भने the biological sex you are born with, it is your gender भनेर के and your gender is determined on the basis of that, but biological sex भनेको is the is what you're born with, what is between your legs भन्ने कुरा अनि मेल जेनेटेरिया फिमेल जेनेटेरिया लिएर आएको हुनसक्छ एउटा इन्डिभिजुअलले but what people don't understand, what most people don't know is there exists a spectrum within biological sex पनि there are intersex people and within intersex people पनि कस्तो diversity छ so people are not just born with male genitalia or female genitalia.
त्यही त हाम्रो we try to fit everything into like two neat little boxes हुन्छ नि तर it's not like that, it's always the spectrum हुन्छ नि त्यसै गरेर तिमीले भन्यो like how we immediately say that your gender identity or your gender is related to your biological sex भनेर that is simply not the case.
Yes
हैन
but कस्तो डिपली इन्स्टिल्ड हुन्छ यो जेन्डर रोल्स जेन्डर नर्म्स भने एउटा बच्चा जन्मिनुभन्दा अगाडिदेखि नै मेरो छोरा भयो भने यो रङको लुगा किन्छु यो खेलाउन दिन्छु भनेर के तर जेन्डर आइडेन्टिटी भनेको इट इज how you perceive yourself, right. It comes from within. आफूले चाहिँ आफूलाई के भनेर आइडेन्टिफाई गर्छ do you identify as a man, do you identify as a woman अनि यो दुईटा बाइनरी टर्म्स मा नै आइडेन्टिफाई नगर्न सक्ने नि हुन सक्छ मान्छेहरू so they might call themselves non binary
अनि कुरा आयो
yes अलैङ्गिक भनेर कतिजनाले आफूलाई चिनाउन सक्नुहुन्छ अनि अर्को भनेको जेन्डर एक्सप्रेसन भयो हैन आफूलाई कसरी प्रस्तुत गरिन्छ अभिव्यक्ति कसरी गरिन्छ
राइट सो हामीले चाहिँ के सोचेर हुन्छ नि जेनरली if you're like a male हैन if you're born male you have to present as a man and you have to be masculine भनेको छ हैन हाम्रो सोचाइ चाहिँ त्यसरी जान्छ we think those are like not like they're interchangeable हुन्छ नि यसको सट्टा यो युज गर्न पाए यसको सट्टा यो युज गर्न पाए भनेर
यो युज गर्न पाए भन्दा नि इट कम्स फ्रम योरसेल्फ नि त तिमीलाई कस्तो फिल हुन्छ त्यो अनुसार तिमी त्यसरी अभिव्यक्त गर्छौ नि त तिमीलाई आज प्यान्ट लगाउन मन लाग्यो तिमीले प्यान्ट लगाएर आयो मलाई आज स्कर्ट लाउन मन लाग्यो मैले स्कर्ट लगाए तर मैले आज स्कर्ट लगाए या तिमीले आज प्यान्ट लगाएर आयो भनेर मैले तिमीलाई पुरुष भनेर भन्ने कुरा त भएन नि त तर हाम्रो समाजमा चाहिँ अब अलि फेमिनिन भएर प्रस्तुत हुने पुरुषहरूलाई यो त के हो त्यो भनेको इट इज अ कम्प्लिटली डिफरेन्ट थिङ इट इज
अब त्यो ओरिएन्टेसन
तिम्रो अभिमुखीकरण यौन अभिमुखीकरण भयो तिम्रो अट्र्याक्सन तिमी कसलाई माया गर्छौतिर गयो त्यो
सो यसमा रोमान्टिक अट्र्याक्सनको कुरा आयो फिजिकल अट्र्याक्सनको कुरा आयो इमोसनल अट्र्याक्सनको कुरा आयो हुन्छ नि लाइक ओरिएन्टेसन भनेपछि हाम्रो अट्र्याक्सनको कुरा आयो सो हामीले जेनरली गे लेस्बियन यो बाइसेक्सुअल भनेको यिनीहरू चाहिँ सबै ओरिएन्टेसनतिर गयो
अनि अट्र्याक्सन हुन पनि सक्छ नहुन सक्छ
राइट के भन्छ हामीले अब जेनरली ओरिएन्टेसन भन्ने चाहिँ के सोध्छ भने हाम्रोमा चाहिँ सोचाइ चाहिँ के छ भने यु हेभ टु बी अट्र्याक्टेड टु समवन होइन कोहीसँग लाइक फिजिकल अट्र्याक्सन हुनैपर्छ अर सेक्सुअल अट्र्याक्सन हुनैपर्छ भनेर छ होइन बट द्याट इज नट नेसेसरी द केस राइट समवन क्यान हेभ भेरी इन्टेन्स रोमान्टिक अट्र्याक्सन हुन्छ नि माया धेरै गर्न सक्छ तर सेक्सुअल अट्र्याक्सन नहुन सक्छ राइट सो वी एसेक्सुअल भयो त्यो होइन त्यसै गरेर समवन माइट हेभ सेक्सुअल अट्र्याक्सन बट माइट नट फिल त्यति रोमान्टिक अट्र्याक्सन होइन त्यो एरोमान्टिकतिर गयो हामीले चाहिँ अगेन इट्स दिज बक्सेस हुन्छ नि
सोसाइटल कन्स्ट्रक्ट हो के यो सबै तर हामी चाहिँ के हाम्रो सोच चाहिँ के छ भने युआर बोर्न विथ जेन्डर युआर बोर्न विथ यर के अरे सेक्सुअल ओरिएन्टेसन
राइट
विच इज नट द केस
सो इट्स द सेम थिङ म चाहिँ बेस्ट थिङ टु से इट लाइक टु बक्स हुन्छ नि कि युआर आइदर हेटेरोसेक्सुअल अर होमोसेक्सुअल होइन युआर आइदर म्यान or woman होइन you're either masculine or feminine भनेर छ which we know is not true हुन्छ नि there's a lot of fluidity between them होइन अनि के भन्छ a lot of it is not rigid हुन्छ नि it's very flexible
yes
अनि it's almost a spectrum
it exists in a spectrum so
and even when we talk about these terms होइन आजकल I feel like a lot of these terms are better known तर these type of like gay lesbian भनेर it's almost been derogatory हुन्छ नि हामीले अघि न पनि कुरा गरेका थियौँ लाइक हाम्रो लाइक स्कुलको लाइक हाम्रो आफ्नै एक्सपिरियन्स कस्तो भएको थियो वेन वी वेयर इन स्कुल हामीलाई जिस्काएको भनेर हुन्छ नि सो दिज गे लेस्बियन भनेपछि इट्स अलमोस्ट सिन एज डिरोगेटरी हुन्छ नि लाइक नराम्रो गरेर भन्न खोजेको जस्तै गरेर कुरा गर्छ अनि लाइक द्याट हेज बिन सो हार्मफुल टु अ लट अफ द पिपल इन द कम्युनिटी हुन्छ नि आई ह्याड फ्रेन्ड्स हु लाइक मलाई गे भन्न पनि कति वर्षसम्म लाइक हुन्छ नि गाह्रो भएको
थियो
किनभने त्यो सुनेको नै कस्तो नेगेटिभली छ कि हुन्छ नि वेन दे ट्राई टु लाइक वेन दे वान्ट टु बी प्राउड देयर अफ्रेड हुन्छ नि त्यस्तो पुश ब्याक आउँछ भनेर क्या
अनि त्यसमा डिग्निटी र प्राइड के वेयर कहाँनिर गएर ठोकिन्छ भने मान्छेको आइडेन्टिटीले डिग्निटी र प्राइडलाई कसरी इम्प्याक्ट गरिरहेको छ मेन्टल वेलबिङ मेन्टल हेल्थमा कस्तो इम्प्याक्ट परिरहेको छ
अनि यसमा पनि लाइक तिमीले मेन्टल हेल्थको कुरा निकाल्यो होइन लाइक टिनेज your years as a teenager is a very confusing time हुन्छ नि it's a lot of push and pull between like learning about yourself learning about the world your body is changing होइन अनि त्यसमा you add on trying to like explore your gender identity तिम्रो expression कसरी गर्न खोज्छ your orientation these are such heavy topics to think about when you're a young age हुन्छ नि when in a young age अनि त्यसको माथि नि when your society is not accepting it's like a bigger burden हुन्छ नि so mental health को त crisis like in queer communities there's a lot of mental health issues पनि हुन्छ नि त्यही रिजनले गर्दा जस्तै मैले
अनि that is where safe space needs to be created त्यो discourse पनि important छ जस्तो लाग्छ के मलाई you're already conflicted with your body with your identity you're questioning yourself अनि त्यो एक्सप्रेस गर्ने ठाउँ पनि भएन भने अनि एक्सप्रेस गरिरहेको छ भने पनि यस्तो पुशब्याक आइरहेछ बुली भइरहेको छ भने you not want to be yourself you'd feel very out of the box हुन्छ नि म त कस्तो फिट इन नै हुन्न भनेर
अब यसमा पनि like a lot of people like parents that I've seen they don't want they say things like oh I'm okay with someone else's child being gay but not my own and when we ask them why vanera and they're more likely to respond I don't want them to have to face the pushback yes I don't want them to go out into the world and be made fun of I want to keep them safe of course like to the parents ko instinct huncha haina like I totally understand that त्यसले गर्दा पनि I think we need to push out this narrative that being gay or being lesbian, just being part of the queer community is not a negative thing. हुन्छ नि?
Yes.
Like there's
And
joy
there's
in it.
not, yeah, there's,
Right.
it's not always struggles
Right.
and के भन्ने heartbreaks.
Right. Like I think Pride Parade is like a very good example. We can see like they're celebrating themselves, हुन्छ नि? So I hope like it's like हाम्रो podcast
And there are examples, very good examples of queer people being at these position and
Right.
authority. So it's important हुन्छ नि त्यो representation पनि it really matters के अनि या मिडियाको रोल इन इट हाम्रो पेरेन्ट्सको पर्सेप्सन पनि कसरी बिल्ड भयो होला भने एक त we did not get sexuality education, we did not, अनि the least amount of knowledge we have about the community comes from media, अनि मिडियामा for the longest of time कसरी पोर्ट्रे भइरहेको छ the community and as हुन्छ नि बलिउड मुभिजमा एक्जाम्पलरी जोक क्लाउनिश क्यारेक्टर्स जसरी अनि मेबी द्याट इज वाट आवर पेरेन्ट्स सी हुन्छ नि when we talk about queer.
Like media, you brought up such a good point, but media like whenever queer people come up, it's always there the butt of the joke.
Yes.
And I think our parents are afraid my child will be the butt of the joke.
End up being that one.
Right. And it like brings around like so like उनीहरूलाई एक्सेप्ट गर्न मन छ, दे वान्ट टु लर्न, बट देयर इज अलवेज दिस पुसब्याक हुन्छ नि, यो हुन्छ मलाई एक्सेप्ट गर्दैन, हुन्छ नि मेरो बच्चालाई लाइक एक्सेप्ट गर्दैन भनेर एउटा फियर चाहिँ हुन्छ.
It is important that we vocalize and sensitize about these issues.
किनभने like I think the queer workshop itself is like a good example of that, right? मैले त्यो वर्कसप गरेर बेला, so I went back, like I think it was the third or the fourth day, I went back and my dad had just come back from work, and usually he asked me कस्तो भयो के भयो भनेर, and he was doing the same thing, and I was explaining to him like म चाहिँ यो वर्कसप हो, यस्तो पढाउँछ, यस्तो फेसिलिटिजहरू छ भनेर हैन. अनि he just looked at me and was like, yeah, I already know these things. I was so surprised, right? I was not expecting him to be like, oh मलाई त थाहा छ यस्तो भनेर हैन. But he was like, and I asked him, it's like, how did you know this one? And he pulled up a video, like a podcast segment, like it was like 5 minutes segment between a man and a trans woman talking. And there she explained it so beautifully. And he was like, yeah, I got it through here. I do have a few questions. Malai sikaidena bhanera, I was floored, by the way. And I like sat there with him and I explained it to him. And he was very willing to learn.
Yeah.
To know that to 5 minute ko clip le मेरो ड्याडले त्यति सिक्नु भयो भने हुन्छ नि, like what can like हाम्रो podcast do, हुन्छ नि. So I'm hoping हाम्रो podcast ले पनि यसरी नै like parents भयो, like people who are still struggling to accept themselves, or people who don't know like these differences, they want to learn but कहाँबाट सुरु गरौँ भनेर थाहा छैन भने, like I hope they can learn from this podcast.
Yeah, I hope we've talked
I feel like we've talked actually a lot,
It is so good to hear that your dad was so willing to know more, learn about the community, and he asked you questions about it.
Right. So I know that our podcast has a way more like guests coming on, right? And I'm hoping that whatever curiosities I could not like fulfill for my dad, yes, I could not address all of the questions. So I hope as future guest around, he understands more and more.
Yeah.
And I hope like other people also get, because हामीले सुन्ने यस्तो opportunities त धेरै कम पाउँछौँ नि त. So I hope this podcast gives them that, and it's like a well of information, so they can learn.
And I also guess our viewers can see Gehena Dhimaal Foundation ko page, Facebook page or Instagram page to check out what's happening. हामीले कस्तो कामहरु गरिरहेको छौं र to understand more about the spectrum of gender and sexuality.
On Insta page, there's a lot of like information, so like that's also a very good place to start.
Yes.
And yeah, I think we should wrap this up, Baba.